The prairie was quiet that morning, save for the low, rattling sigh of wind through brittle grass and the rhythmic creak of a porch swing that hadn't been touched in years. Dust, like old secrets, drifted in golden motes across the land, and the sun hovered low, casting long shadows that reached across the Cutter ranch like memory stretching its limbs. Boaz Cutter sat in silence, a slab of a man weathered by 30 years of sun, wind, and a grief that hadn't softened. His boots were cracked. His beard hung thick and gray. He hadn't spoken aloud since the fire. There were no fences around his land anymore, just the ghost of them. No cattle, no horses, only the echo of hoofbeats from another life. And yet each morning, Boaz rose before the sun to walk the borders of his forgotten ranch as though something might one day return. He carried a small tin pail with water, poured into a chipped bowl by the post where his dog used to wait, though the dog had died a decade ago. Rituals made the silence tolerable. The knock came just before noon. 3 sharp taps on wood that startled the air like gunshots. Boaz froze with one hand on the kettle. The creak of the gate hadn't warned him, because it hadn't opened. He stepped outside, slow and massive, a shape carved from shadow and memory. On the other side of the porch rail stood 3 young women, dusty and tired, but proud enough not to bow their heads. The eldest stepped forward. She was tall, with a braid like dark rope down her back and eyes that looked like they'd seen death but chosen life anyway. "We don't mean trouble," she said, her voice like worn leather. "We're not beggars. We can work. We just need a few days." Boaz didn't answer. He just looked at them, one by one. The red-haired one wouldn't meet his eye. The third, smallest, seemed to be watching everything at once. Him, the dry wind, the door behind him, even the direction of the sun. The man's silence settled like dust between them. Then he turned and went inside. The door didn't slam. It just shut with the same softness it had for 30 years. But after a few seconds it opened again. He held it wide, said nothing. The 3 women entered without a word. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar smoke and old regrets. There were only 2 chairs. A cracked tin cup lay beside a stove that hissed gently, as if even fire dared not speak here. The red-haired girl, Junie as the others later called her, looked around and smirked. "So this is how giants live?" The eldest shot her a warning glance. "Quiet. I'm just saying," Junie murmured. "I've seen haunted houses with more life in them." Boaz poured water into an iron pot. The fire beneath it was slow, steady, unbothered by the intrusion. He motioned with his chin toward the corner where a stack of wool blankets lay folded and untouched. Clara, the eldest, stepped forward and offered him a hand. "I'm Clara Rose. This is Junie Bell. And the quiet one is Lacey." Lacey was still standing near the doorway, her eyes not on Boaz but on the wall beside him where a faded photograph hung, just out of reach. A woman and child, blurred with age, their faces half burned away by time. The days unfolded slow, like pages from a forgotten journal. The girls stayed because he let them. They cooked simple meals, fetched water from the well, and brought life to a land that had forgotten it. Junie sang when she worked, her voice a cracked but lively thing. Clara kept records in a small notebook, cataloging supplies, meals, weather. Lacey didn't speak much, but she watched Boaz closely. Not suspiciously, curiously. Like someone watching the last ember of a fire, wondering if it might still catch. He didn't talk, but he listened. When Junie joked, his mouth sometimes twitched. When Lacey fell asleep near the hearth, he quietly laid another log on the fire. When Clara stitched a rip in his coat without asking, he left a tin of fresh biscuits at her door the next morning. Every night, they gathered around the unlit fireplace and sat in silence. Not because they had nothing to say but because the stillness began to feel sacred. It wasn't long before the world remembered him. The rider came on the 4th day. Sheriff Elias Dobb, long in the tooth and slow in the saddle. He hadn't visited in years, not since the last census required him to check if Boaz was still breathing. He dismounted without speaking and tied his horse to the same post Boaz used to tie his. He looked at the 3 girls washing pans under the sycamore and then at Boaz, who stood still as a tree. "You makin' a home again, Boaz?" Boaz didn't answer. "Folks are talkin'," Dobb said, removing his hat and wiping the sweat from his brow. "3 young girls livin' alone with you. They don't remember who you were. Only what they heard." Boaz looked toward the gate. It still hung open, a soft creak rocking in the wind. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Elias sighed. "You know what they say." Boaz turned and walked back toward the barn. That night, Clara confronted him. "Is it true?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "About the fire. About the baby." His shoulders tensed just slightly. We heard the story in town. That your wife went mad. That she took your child with her when the flames came. They say you never ran out. Boaz's voice, when it came, was like gravel ground through bone. I ran out holding her. She didn't cry. Smoke took her before sound could. Clara's voice softened. Why didn't you leave this place? He didn't answer. But Lacey, sitting quietly in the shadows, saw the way his fingers curled slightly toward the earth. Like roots. Junie found the cradle the next morning. Buried beneath hay in the far corner of the barn, charred and blackened but still shaped like a child's bed. She didn't say anything. Just pulled the cover back over it and walked away. Lacey started humming when she brushed the horses, a slow lullaby her mother used to sing. One evening Boaz walked past her and paused. Don't stop, he said, voice barely above a whisper. She used to sing that too. She nodded once and kept humming. The storms came at nightfall. Rain that hadn't touched the land in months finally broke loose, rattling the tin roof like laughter from the dead. Thunder cracked overhead. Lightning lit the fields white and raw. When the lightning hit the old barn, fire roared up like a scream from the earth. Boaz didn't hesitate. He ran barefoot into the blaze. The horses were still inside. Junie screamed after him, but it was Lacey who followed. The two of them emerged minutes later, smoke-streaked and coughing, soot clinging to their skin. That's when she saw the scars, jagged and cruel, crawling across his back like a map of old punishment. And still, he carried the foal on his shoulders like it weighed nothing. He sat by the fire afterward, shirtless and silent. Lacey wrapped his shoulders with a wet cloth and said nothing. Until he spoke. She lit it herself. My wife. Thought the world was ending. That we were all just ghosts waiting to be burned. Lacey nodded slowly, tears welling. I tried to save her. I did. I know, she whispered. The next morning the girls knelt. Not in prayer, not in shame, but in decision. In the pale light of dawn, before the porch steps, they lowered themselves to their knees like pilgrims before a shrine. Boaz stepped outside. His shadow loomed over them. Clara spoke first. We want to stay. Not because we need your land or your fire. But because we see you. Junie added, we see the man, not the monster in the stories. Lacey looked up last. And we see the fire still in you. Boaz looked down at them, and for the first time in 30 years, a tear rolled down his cheek and vanished into the dust. He turned, walked back inside and left the door wide open. They rode into town a week later. All four of them. Boaz on horseback, the three girls flanking him like a new kind of cavalry. People stared. Some whispered. One old man spit. Junie stepped forward like she was born to fight, but Boaz stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. She blinked, confused, but didn't move. They bought supplies together. Tools, seed, fabric. Boaz handed the clerk a silver coin and said, put the rest on my tab. Mrs. Hallow watched them from the saloon window. Her hand trembled on the glass. The sheriff tipped his hat in silence. That night, as dusk folded across the plains, laughter rose from the Cutter porch. Not loud, not raucous, just warm. Like something had found its way back home. And in the quiet afterward, as stars blinked down from a wide, forgiving sky, Boaz sat in the rocking chair with Lacey beside him, humming again. The wind moved through the grass like an old song, and something inside him, something long sealed, finally exhaled. Sometimes the loneliest soil holds the richest seeds. And sometimes it takes 3 strangers, 1 fire and 30 silent years to coax them into bloom.